I think few would argue that Lightning Strike in this league looks more beautiful than modern art, though to be fair, everything in the world looks better than modern art. Lightning Strike is also my favorite skill in the game. I've used it with Poison multiple times, built an Omni version, and even a version focused on stacking accuracy. In this league, they reworked my favorite raider that everyone used for Lightning Strike, turning her into some sort of nasty, confusing warden. So I decided to build Lightning Strike through this monstrosity. And, well, I liked it. In fact, I'm blown away. Right now, this is my favorite version of Lightning Strike, and maybe even my favorite build in the game. It's hard to describe this build with words, so I'll try numbers. 400k plus EHP, over 20 million damage in ideal situations, clearing 2 screens at a time, and a budget of about 35 divines. But convenience? 0. Let's break it down, starting with the budget. 30 to 40 divines to make your little girl stand in the last wave of the simulacrum under 2 big beefy bosses, casually munching cookies, and then, with the press of a couple of buttons, just blow up Kosis. Sounds fair, right? Actually, no, it's not. It's broken. I started with a budget of 10 divines, which is comparable to Bolivia's budget, and it was only enough for torture and suffering on t17 maps. So if someone tells you that LS Warden is a cool, cheap starter, they've probably had too many mushrooms. Because if you compare this 10 divine build with a poison flask build that costs 5 times less, the flasks are better in every way except clearing. So I recommend starting with flasks or toxic rain or seismic trap, and then respec into warden once you've saved up 20 divines. Without yoke, and a couple of the tamings, your damage is like a beer, and without Svalin, your survivability, not great. Sure, you could build a glass cannon with just tree points, no yoke or rings, and farm while dying a couple of times per map, but that doesn't sound sexy. Mechanics. Let's start with the sad part. Tinctures. The geniuses at GGG, as usual, made something really cool and powerful, something you want to build around, like a constructor set, but then they smeared it with New Zealand dog crap. Bon appetit, by the way. Tinctures are flasks that, when activated, give you a criminal record and massive damage buffs. In my case, they provide about 80% of my build's total damage. Cool, right? Without them, I have 6 million DPS. With them, over 25 million. But they have a bug, or maybe it's a feature. Your mana starts draining fast, and then you're left sitting with 0 mana, having a blast. It's kind of balanced, a big buff for a short time. But the problem is that we're playing Warden, and a Warden can make tinctures last for 6 seconds after they've finished their effect, while their cooldown is 8 seconds. Here's the catch. You have to press 2 tinctures every 8 seconds on maps, bosses, and so on. Making them automatically trigger on cooldown the honest way is impossible. And in the era of auto flasks, pressing 2 buttons on time is tough. If you press them too early, they'll just deactivate and your damage buff will drop. Pressing them too late, you lose damage. It's a mess. For this build, I turned into a hacker and used programs. I won't say which, but a Google search for something like keyboard macros should help you figure out how to make 2 buttons press automatically every 9 seconds. Yeah, it's not really allowed by GGG, but I think they made it worse. Manually pressing tinctures every 8 seconds without the ability to spam them should be banned by the Geneva Convention, because it's pure torture for a living being, called a human. And basically, that's the only downside of the build, because in every other way, it's absolutely amazing. Now, explaining what these tinctures are is much harder than trying them out yourself, but I'll give it a shot. These are flasks that you activate to gain a powerful buff, which is written on the tincture. For example, I have a tincture with 213% crit and 38% attack speed. I won't even comment on those absurd numbers. It's like having 15 of these yellow jewels from just one tincture, and you can use 2 of them. But they burn through mana like crazy, draining 1% of your mana per second for each stack. So at 12 stacks, that's 12% mana per second, and it's not based on your current mana, but your maximum. Fortunately, we have ways to fix the mana cost and the overall mana issue. First, there's the Warden's Point that allows the tincture to last 6 more seconds after it turns off if you've accumulated 12 stacks of mana burning. So, more than 12 stacks of mana burning is as useful as a 3rd leg instead of a... Anyway, there's a point on the tree that automatically turns off the tincture when you reach 12 stacks of mana burning. Plus, the first 6 out of 12 charges don't have the debuff. So, with just a couple of points, we fix all the mana issues. Moving on from the subclass, the Warden also has something like a red presidential button in a suitcase called Unbound Avatar. It gives only 80% more damage for 10 seconds. Yes, only 80%. Did you hear that? It's the biggest damage boost from a single button in the game. But it's not that simple. You still have to stack it up, which takes time, about 8 seconds. The avatar lasts for 10 seconds, and after 8 seconds, you can press the button again, doubling your damage for another 10 seconds. Everything's fine, right? Unbound Avatar stacks from elemental ailments, and to speed up the stacking, we take this point instead of shock. Yes, with shock, we theoretically have much more damage, especially if it's stacked, but Hoarfrost not only helps us survive on maps, but also stacks Unbound Avatar faster. And shock, which applies immediately instead of stacking, is also good for maps, although it deals way more damage on bosses. But it's not worth it. Different elemental ailments not only speed up Avatar stacking, but also increase damage through Rings and Amulet. In our case, Yoke and the Taming. Together, this combo provides something ridiculous. Trinity is also crucial. It basically lowers resistance and adds more damage, one of the strongest support gems in the game. But to make it work, you need to hit with at least 2 elements. 3 is even better, so it charges faster. But that's not a big problem, because the build uses claws with 3 elemental damage types, plus flat damage from the helmet and flat damage from the aura, so there shouldn't be any issues with charging Trinity. Returning projectiles. They basically increase both single target DPS and clear speed. Playing Lightning Strike without them is sad. Nemus in this league costs as much as 3 delicious pizzas, so forget about it. And honestly, I don't like it on LS anyway. The beams that bring pain fly in random directions, often not where you need them to. That's why many players have switched to a 2-handed sword and rune enchantment. But in my build, giving up a shield is impossible, and the enchantment costs as much as my house. The easiest option: just use a support gem. It does reduce the damage of returning projectiles, but if they come back to you, it means they care about you, just like those who watch this video care about me. Please leave a like. Nightblade. It gives a lot of crit and basically solves all the problems with it. It also gives elusive, which makes us run fast and avoid unnecessary hits. And while under elusive, our damage increases significantly. With the Veteran's Wrath Amulet enchantment, we can comfortably maintain 50 rage at all times, which means 30% more damage. Yes, the build's trick is that it stacks more damage rather than just increasing it, which doesn't add but multiplies the damage. Finally, the Lightning Strike mechanics. When you use this skill to attack some nasty boss, you may notice that in addition to hitting the target with beams, lightning also strikes down from above, hitting the target. This beam indicates that you've dealt damage in melee. In the POB, it's labeled as a melee hit. Here's a small trick. If you stand a bit farther from the target and strike, you can deal damage both as a melee hit and with a projectile, effectively doubling your damage. This is important and should always be used on tough enemies, but to do this, you need to take this point. Next, let's talk about the defense. In this build, the defense is multi-layered, with a lot of defensive mechanics that cover each other. If Unbound Element is the President's red button for dealing targeted damage to a specific enemy, then the defenses are the bodyguards that protect our 4k HP, which is also encased in a suit of armor. Let's break it down. Imagine we're a white skeleton with a sword, and our goal is to destroy this warden once and for all. What will we encounter when we try to damage our girl? The first thing that will trigger is evasion. The build has more than 15,000 evasion, giving about a 70% chance to dodge, or to be precise, 68%, meaning that every third hit will connect. So we strike twice, and on the third try, do we hit? No. Because next comes the most significant meme and joke, which is the Svalin shield. It's just broken as hell, even without going into too much detail, but we will dive into it. 2 stats are crucial on this shield. The first is the chance to block spell damage, and the second is the lucky blocks. If the spell block is clear, what exactly are these lucky blocks? In my build, I have 63% attack block, meaning 2 out of 3 hits will be blocked. But that's if we had normal blocks. Lucky blocks, on the other hand, essentially work like this. We're a skeleton striking our girl, and the hit gets blocked by the game. It makes sense. We strike again, and the game blocks it too. But then the third hit, which should land, triggers the lucky block mechanic, giving us another chance to block that hit. This means the block chance is recalculated, and we must win the 1 in 3 chance to hit once again. So to land a hit on our girl, we need to first win against evasion, 1 in 3, and then twice win against blocks, 1 in 3. The chance to hit our beloved target is a whopping 3.5%. But let's assume we do land a hit. What comes next? Next, we have 5,000 armor, which isn't a lot but better than 0, plus 30 fortification stacks, reducing all incoming hit damage by 30%, and 3 endurance charges reducing it by another 12%. Naturally, Steel Skin adds 2,200 HP, and if we stand still, which we do since we're using LS, which stands still during the attack, Arctic Armor will reduce all physical damage taken by another 21%. And if we happen to stand on sapped ground, damage will be reduced by another 6%. In the end, if a hit does land with a 3.5% chance, after all mage reductions, it will be something insignificant. That's why I managed to level from 94 to 97 on this build with 0 deaths, running tough maps in breaches, sometimes with delirium, and so on. Oh, I forgot to mention, we also freeze everything we can hit. Yes, that's also considered defense because enemies that are frozen can't hit us. Next, let's talk about items and gems. In general, Lightning Strike doesn't require any uniques without which the skill wouldn't work, but for my variation, it's worth spending a bit to get a couple of forbidden unique substances, which we'll discuss a bit later. Now, let's talk about the armor and the main 6-link. I have yellow armor with as much life, resistances, and most importantly, armor and evasion as possible. The last stats should be at least 2,000 each, preferably 2,500. I also crafted Spell Block Chance and increased Tempest Shield effect on it, so this armor gives me 10% pure Spell Block just from Eater and Exarch crafts. I've seen many people use Doppelganger, but in my opinion, compared to good rare armor, it's trash because you can't craft Spell Block on it, and it doesn't provide resistances. Yes, the damage reduction is pretty high, but overall, why? If a mob needs to roll a 0 on a roulette wheel to hit us, the same 2,500 armor will give decent defenses, even if a very lucky skeleton with a club hits us. The Vol version of the gem is like an LS totem, which can be 2 at once. They can be used for clearings, like opening a breach or in an expedition, as well as for bursting a terrifying boss. Under the influence of Unbound Avatar, it deals absurdly high damage and almost one-shots everything. Instead of crafting increased Tempest Shield effect, you can craft Fortify Chance if you don't have the ability to get it from gloves. After all, at the start of the league, they were expensive. But in the future, gloves will be better because they give 100% chance to fortify, and it's 10% more than usual. This 10% is the max roll and costs a lot of money, but these gloves, besides providing strong fortify as a defense, also give attack speed for each fortification stack, totaling 30% attack speed. The downside is that you can't get pierce on them, and they don't give resistances, but the pros far outweigh the cons. The weapon is claws with 3 elemental damage mods plus crit. Simple claws with a lot of DPS, nothing special. Crafting 100% hit chance is unnecessary because you can easily get accuracy on the Warden's side. Don't prioritize any 2 elements, let alone 1. You need to take 3 different types of damage to keep Trinity working reliably and stacking quickly. Crit chance also matters. Although it's not hard to stack crits with all the charges, the tree, etc., the more crit chance on the claws, the more it will contribute to other areas. The claws are socketed with automation gems, to which the defense button is connected. Don't forget to turn on automation because sometimes, we take Steel Skin instead of Molten Shell because the former doesn't scale with anything and simply gives a 2,200 HP shield, while Molten Shell requires a lot of armor, which this build doesn't have. The Svalin Shield is a unique league item, literally the best unique you can use in any build with a shield and at least some block. It provides absurd defense on maps. Yes, it has a reduced max block, but we won't reach the max block without selling our sister to grown men, so this downside is negligible. You might ask why the gem setup is so strange. The reason is that the shield has a trigger, but the catch is that it can only trigger elemental gems, so Steel Skin and other useful gems don't fit. But on the other hand, this specific setup gives us flat damage and consecrated ground. The helmet is based on cold damage called Blizzard Crown, with suppression, HP, and some resistances. It simply provides a lot of damage, about 10% of all damage in the build, so skipping such a cap would be a sin. Moreover, we have no problems with mana reservation, so we just maximize damage, and this cap is very cheap. Ideally, you could craft Pierce here, but since we don't take it on gloves, we'll have to take points on the tree. And there are 3 of them, so crafting it on the helmet makes little sense. The gems are Precision through Arrogance, Dash, and Blood Rage. The boots have suppression, HP, and resistances. Why don't I use it series step? First, they're expensive, and second, after 2 to 3 seconds on the map, we gain all the charges in the game. Power charges come from Assassin's Mark, Frenzy charges from Blood Rage, and on bosses, they also come from the nodes in the tree. Endurance charges are always present due to blocks, and we block often and a lot. Therefore, unique boots are as necessary as sugar to a diabetic. Make sure that Arctic armor isn't linked to other gems, otherwise it will require unnecessary mana. The rings are the taming, which simply give a lot of damage in combination with this build. You can enhance them with elemental catalysts for even better results. These rings also give some resistances, which is nice. The amulet is Yoke of Suffering, providing resistances and absurdly high damage, as it increases damage for each ailment on the enemy, including non-elemental ones. So it's not a bad idea to take one node for bleeding, which also counts as an ailment. Overall, a lot of damage. Oh yes, the anointment is Rage, giving another 30% more damage. Yes, it costs 2 golden oils, but it's worth it. The belt is a Stygian Vice with intelligence, chaos resistance, and HP. You can also get increased elemental damage with attack skills on it, a standard belt. The jewel inside the belt is for a large amount of damage, but it can also cover stat needs. Jewels. I only use 2 jewels, without clusters or anything like that, to avoid overloading the build. Besides, the skill tree has so many useful goodies that there simply aren't enough points for clusters. The first and most important jewel is Lethal Pride, which provides a ton of strength. It's mainly taken for strength, but it also offers many useful bonuses. For example, mine gives 90% crit, but you might get different bonuses. I bought it for 120 chaos on the 5th day of the league, though prices have skyrocketed now. The second jewel is a Thread of Hope, a large one from Uber Cyrus. It used to cost 50 divines a few leagues ago, but now it's 40 chaos. It helps grab crucial points that are located far away. Flasks and Tinctures. Let's start with Tinctures, as they are a significant part of the build's damage. The first one boosts crits, and it's crafted with increased effect and attack speed. Yes, there's a penalty to mana recovery speed, but for us, this penalty is negligible. The second flask increases elemental damage and penetration. It's best to get one with at least T2 rolls, since the build's overall damage heavily depends on this. Next is a Life Flask plus Bleed Removal. Evasion plus % evasion, and Chaos Resistance plus % armor. We take a bit of percentage armor since we get some from gear anyway. GGG removed attack speed, thanks by the way. So movement speed isn't that important, that leaves armor. For prefixes, craft charge generation on crit. Bandits and Pantheon. I decided to side with Alira because capping resistances can be a bit tricky, and 1 point won't fix the situation. As for the Pantheon, freeze immunity isn't needed because it's covered by Arctic armor. Leveling the build. I can't recommend starting with LS Warden right away, since tinctures are hard to find early in the game, and without them, the build is weak. It's better to start with jumping flasks. Plus, I have a great guide for them. What is the build weak against? It's impossible to run maps with Cannot Be Leeched or Elemental Reflect unless you have Awakened Elemental Damage at level 5 and craft reduced mana cost on your helmet, but the gem is very expensive, so this is closer to endgame. My version with the helmet and gem will be in the description. As for map mods that are just unpleasant, those would be no regen, reduced block chance, and monsters that can avoid elemental ailments. These maps are doable, but only if they're T16. On T17, avoid everything listed above. Also, on T17, it's better not to roll monsters can block your attacks, as you'll have to change those points, and your damage will be halved. Not fun. The build is incredibly strong in all aspects, from clear speed, damage, and survivability to enjoyable gameplay, if you're using macros. Without them, everything is still great except for the enjoyable gameplay. Pressing tinctures every 8 seconds is a bit tedious. Anyway, don't forget to like, subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I wish you luck and peace in your city.